Thank you very much, everyone. I want to offer a special also welcome to Urs Rohner, who are joining us. He's come a long way, very early today. Very kind of him to make this stop to really share with us the insights of his career and especially his current challenges and insights about banking and transformation and innovation in the banking industry. I think what we're going to do is I'm going to make a brief introduction of some ideas and issues. We're then going to engage in a bit of back and forth, and then we'll hopefully wrap up by around 6:05 to open up to questions and comments as we go along. So there's a mercifully short time when we're talking at you and a longer time when you can talk with us. How's that? So we'll see how we go. And I think Urs has been incredibly gracious. We're also going to stand here iteratively as we go along. Again, really want to thank you for taking time and also bringing the kind of experience of Credit Suisse. Many of you know Credit Suisse is an extremely distinguished firm, a lot of propriety over time, a lot of innovation, an interesting leader in a global industry and an interesting player in a changing global industry. And so part of the challenge of this conversation is to say it has become commonplace to talk about disruption. I think in every industry, incumbents are looking sideways and backwards and forwards, trying to understand what does it mean to be an incumbent in an industry that is potentially at risk of disruption. I want to say 2 minutes about disruption. Some of you will know this argument already. I want to then use that to really open up the set of issues that Urs is going to share with us. So disruption, I think, so the positive story here is that disruption has become a really common word for many of us in business schools, in industry, and elsewhere. The general argument there is that incumbent firms often become successful and it becomes difficult for them to notice transformations, innovations, and changes that potentially could change the core dimensions of competition, or could change the basis of their advantage, or could in fact change the industry or annihilate the industry in many cases. That argument comes from pioneering work by many people associated with the name of Clay Christensen and others, who argued an interesting argument that many firms who have current market position, current incumbency value, do well, do interesting products and services, innovate along the way. But another firm, a challenger firm, comes along that does what they do but not as well. So that challenger may do something that is akin to what the incumbent offers, but they do it less well, less efficiently, less reliably, with whatever set of concerns that make it not competitive. And the challenge here, the kind of issue here is that many incumbents then fail to notice that. They fail to notice a challenger which doesn't really seem to pose a threat or doesn't really seem to be competitive. And then the kind of formal argument, it goes like this. Over time, those challengers, freed from the expectations or the assumptions of the incumbent industry or the leader in the industry, actually not only do what that leader does well enough, good enough, but they do something different. They do something that offers different kinds of value, creates different kinds of services or offerings, and over time, whether that's a year or 5 years or 10 years or 50 years, actually beat the incumbent, not at its own game, but at a different game that the incumbent didn't notice, right? So the kind of core argument of disruption that you know is status quo, things are how they are, the challenger comes along, doesn't do things as well, isn't noticed, over time iterates, gets better, and eventually displaces the incumbent, not only the firm, but potentially the underlying technology or value system. And that's, as we all know, that's an argument being made about banking today, and that's going to be the topic of our conversation. 2 quick other observations that I would say here, both at Saïd at Oxford and also generally. One is that word disruption, I think, is overused, and I think its commonness has driven out a lot of analytic precision. And so I want to challenge you today to think with us, to think with Urs and me about what disruption actually might mean in the banking industry. What does that mean in the global banking industry? And specifically, I want us to really think very concretely and granularly about what would disruption look like at different parts of the value system? What forms would that take? How would we notice that? So I really want to think, excuse me, I really want to think not only about disruption, but how do firms recognize opportunity? What does transformation look like? In this sense, I'm going to push us to think not about disruption, capital D, the big D, but instead to really understand a whole cascade of smaller innovations, that are often distal to the industry incumbent. They may be occurring in technologies or value offerings or services offerings that are actually currently distant from the business model or the design of an incumbent firm. And that's the interesting question, and this is, I think, what Urs has a lot of insights on. what is it that banking faces today in those distal, potentially transformative activities? What is it that banking needs to notice? How is kind of incumbent banking going to do that? And I think that's a challenge that is common in many industries, but particularly highlighted in banking. I don't want to give away a lot of the insights we're going to hear, but I think my encouragement to you is to begin to think very groundedly in very pragmatic terms. What's the existing value offering? What's the business model? What's the way that value is currently created? Not only at the outcome, but all along a complex services offering development, and begin to think in those kind of more granular terms as we listen to Urs. So please come join me and hold forth.
Thank you, Mark. I think you have really teed it up very nicely. Let me say a couple of words. First, it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here. In fact, it's really an honor for me to be here to discuss innovation and disruption with you today. And then maybe to tee it up from my side, let me say a couple of things about our industry and how I see it and where I see the challenges coming from. And I also see what fintech companies or these so-called disruptive companies actually do to our industry or maybe doing to our industry. First of all, I would say, contrary to many other industries where we have seen really huge disruptions and big companies going away, I mean, Nokia, Kodak, maybe just two examples. But you have seen industries that have completely changed their business model, had to change their business model completely, and have basically disappeared. New people have come in and have taken over that business completely. In the financial services industry up until now, you have not really seen that to that extent, which is surprising, right? It's surprising because banks normally, they employ a lot of technology people. I mean, if you take Credit Suisse as an example, we have maybe 10,000 people in IT. And the industry has been quite good. Some people may say not even good for their own sake or their own good in innovating products, inventing new products. But that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, when you look as to when we talk about disruption now in today's, clients' behavior have changed, clients' expectations have changed, and the way you look at businesses and the way you look at products has changed too. This is due to a number of factors. One is transparency, the other one is comparability. Those are two things which, in a way, were a bit counter against many of the older models in banking, I would say. And interestingly enough, this is not where we have seen a fundamental change resulting from these things to the business model of banks in general. And I will focus now a bit more today on the wealth management piece than on the wholesale banking, because it's a bit easier for me to actually do it because it's core, and you can explain some of the things that I think are relevant when you look at disruption easier than otherwise. What we have seen, and you see that now, you can read it in the newspaper every day, there are fintech companies that have started to address parts of the value chain of what banks have been doing, be it in terms of lending club, crowdfunding funding applications, be it in the area of risk management, for instance, completely new ways as to how you can risk manage your portfolios or your books at, I would say, much less costs, at a much reduced costs. And you see it also in the area of the wealth management or private banking business, where basically you have model portfolios, you can track other investors, and you get a lot of these things you get for free. But what you can see is in most of those fintech companies, they take one slice out of the value chain. Payments, for instance, is one good example. In fairness, has largely gone away from banks. It's done differently. And when you think about it, you have to say, well, what's the end game really? Now, I would say what we'll be seeing to happen is, because of that and because certain parts of the value chain can be produced much cheaper, you will see that generally the cost base of banks, of traditional banks, is under heavy pressure. And this is exactly what you're seeing right now. That's why all the banks have to do a lot on costs. We did a lot on costs. So far, we took out about 4.5 billion of our annual running costs in the last 3 years. As a result of that, on the other hand, it's also an opportunity, obviously, for banks to go into looking at your technology costs and in doing certain things cheaper, faster, better. That's one aspect of it. The other one is the transparency piece. Transparency and comparability means clients will judge your services much more critical than before, because they can. And at some point you will, and that's when I look into the future, and that's where I would say, my thinking started about disruption, about changing also the business model, is in a world where basically a couple of years from now, almost everything will be transparent. And you will get a lot of information that typically has been provided by banks in the context of advisory services and others for free. The ultimate question that you have to ask yourselves is, why would the client pay you 80 or 100 basis points for your advice if he gets 80% of that for free? So what it basically does, it focuses your thinking on what is ultimately banking services, what's the service, the add-on you provide, and there you very quickly come to the question of banking is more than just individual parts of a value chain. Advice is more than that. Advice has to do with judgment. It has to do with being able to absorb a lot of information and take the right conclusions out of it. For that, a lot of the applications that fintech companies provide, be it through big data, algorithms and others, can be very helpful because you may know certain things better. But in the end, it will always come down to making judgment calls, taking decisions as to what you want to do. And therefore, I mean, I have a couple of theses in terms of disruption. I think fintech newcomers, probably for our industry, do at the moment more construction than disruption. There may be fields where some parts go away, like payments or so, but generally they provide a service that the incumbents can also use. And a lot of the back office disruption, I would suggest, basically benefits the incumbents. If they are fast enough to team up with people in those space and actually take the right conclusions out of it, namely try to drive down their cost base, because inevitably their gross margins will go down, have been going down and will continue to go down. And thereby, if you do that right, you may keep up your net margins. I think most of the fintech innovators will have a hard time actually being long-term successful, because what they need, because the way the system works, so their model works, is basically they can produce something cheaper, but they need a lot of growth to actually scale up. And I'm not sure that this, in all the cases or many of the cases, will be possible to do that fast enough in order to have a valuable business case going forward. The big chance for many of those companies, and that's what you currently are seeing, is that they team up with larger banks, be it by way of joint ventures, that they are being taken over. And that's something which I think prudent incumbents should be doing. Yeah. But ultimately, I would say, the winning approach, in my opinion, is that you are able to provide an integrated financial service even in the future. And there, the big topic would be is, what do you have to change to be and remain attractive for your customers? And that will be different, because one big topic in the whole sphere, I would say, is the element of trust. Banking relationships are relationships of trust between the client and the bank. You give your money to your bank because you think you will get it back, hopefully with interest or more when you want it, and you can be trusted that the bank is around when you need it, doesn't do stupid things with your money, etc. The trust element, and that's a bit counterintuitive initially, will remain as important or maybe even more important in a digitized world than before. Before, you had this 30-year-old relationship with your bankers, with the relationship manager. You had dinner or lunch with him twice or 3 times a year. He showed you the portfolio. You discussed things. You could call him up. In the digitized world, it's much more important that you have that too, that you feel comfortable and trustworthy. And that, I think, is the biggest chance for incumbents, if they get it right, if they have the right applications to basically provide the services that clients want, but on the other hand are able to sort of create that band of trust with the future clients. And the future clients are not only you, but maybe your kids. They will not go to banks. They will do it via their iPads. And this is not just at the retail segment of our payments. You will do it throughout the entire value chain. You'll do it within the high net worth space and in the ultra high net worth space. And that's one of the reasons why at Credit Suisse, what we have done via Project Future Lab, we have basically started to think about as to how the future customer will react, what he will want, and what that does to our current way of operating the business. And one of the projects that grew out of that is the creation of a digital private bank for the higher segment. We are beta testing it at the moment as we speak in Asia, and where we believe we have a comprehensive offering to the clients where they can do a lot of things themselves. They can even probably team up or interact with other people, other clients if they so want. They get access to top-notch research, but they also have the possibility in a very easy way to contact the relationship manager, to speak to risk people, to speak to specialists and things. That, I think, is one of the ways as to how you can address the overall thing. But disruption in banking will come. And my claim always is internally, and initially when I brought this up, this was not that everybody just jumped on the idea and said, well, it's great, let's do that. It will change fundamentally the way banks operate. The requirements for relationship managers will significantly change. You may need, to some extent, different people for the jobs, but you will still need it. If you don't do that, then I'm afraid you will risk being out of business relatively quickly because simply your clients will not want to deal with you. And it's much more about than just having some sexy applications where you can do payments fast or trade your stock cheaply. That's for granted. But I mean, it's the overall provision of financial services and advice that you have to put on a new footing. And it was also, I mean, maybe before I stop here, it was one of the reasons when I thought about the development of our board of directors going forward that I have asked Professor Sebastian Thrun, who was the founder of Google X, the research laboratory. He's actually the guy who invented the car that drives without the driver, among other things. I asked him to join our board, not because I want to build a bank that drives without bankers, but because I wanted to...
without the bankers, that was the clear kind of imagery there.
I knew you would say that. No, but because I had long discussions with him from the early moment on. I first spoke to him about what will future customers or clients want from us, and how can we address those needs in a way that is that basically answers those demands in a way that they feel happy, satisfied, and they think that for the service they get, they are prepared and happy to pay us a fee. That's one of the things, and that's in my opinion, in the end, that's the most fundamental and basic issue you have to deal with it. On the good side, on the opportunity side, and that's really the last thing I say is, if you get that right, if you get the model right, it's obviously then much easier to basically transport that into other markets and to grow market shares and maybe even to develop new markets in other areas that otherwise you would not have been able to do because you would have to build 350 branches first or whatever. I think that's the upside potential. And as you know, bankers sometimes also are optimists despite all the bad news you hear every day. That's basically the way I think we should steer the industry. And that's certainly the way I will try to steer our company too. So that's by way of introduction.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much. Let me come in. So I'm going to make a brief kind of comment and pose a question, then Urs is going to continue. So I think you've been really helpful in outlining for us a number of conventional understandings of threats to banking. I think you've also made a strong claim about trust being at the heart of contemporary banking and the future of banking, really managing both institutional and personal trust. And I guess if this were a regular classroom and you made this analysis, as my students know, I'd now say, okay, that's really interesting. Okay, what are you going to do about that, right? So it'd be lovely to hear from you a little bit about what you see as next steps, or how you think you're going to move from the current position you have, how you're going to learn, how are you going to do some of these things. I'd say, just give you a minute to think about that, I'd say, in the comments that Urs made, I think of things like people think about mobile money, about the kind of transformations in the notion of non-fiat currencies. I think over a longer time, the lessons that might have come from, so in a sense I'm going to say, what are lessons you can learn from 20 years of changes in the financial service industry. So think about mobile money and electronic banking, electronic wallets. I'm interested in things like over the last 30 years, financial markets and stock exchanges in particular were transformed. So what can we learn from those transformations? I think another issue you mentioned on reputation trust, many platforms say that we all use have ways to electronically, digitally measure and accumulate trust and credibility. So I'm curious what you think banking can learn from many of these, let's call them experiments, and what's the way forward from your perspective, if that's not too direct?
No, it's not direct at all. I mean, first of all, I think what you rightly point out is we have to learn from that, and I don't think anybody could claim he has the silver bullet. Yeah. At least otherwise, some of the banks would probably look differently already. So we have to test things. There are a couple of elements that you can do. I think the interaction between the bank and the client, not on an individual basis, but on a larger scale, has to be intensified significantly. In other words, if you go on Amazon and you they have immediate feedback on customer satisfaction, on what clients want, what is good, what is not so good. One element that you can do. I think big data will help a lot in finding out much better what clients really want, as opposed to what we think they want. That will be another element that will help. And if you get to a position where you basically address these issues, maybe even before a client would ask you for it over time, it will obviously help you strengthen the relationship that you have with banks. The third area where I think we can do more and learn more is, and that is basically the result of 30 years of banking regulation and regulation and regulation. I think there are smart ways to educate clients to get them to a higher level of understanding and know-how of the financial service industry. So for instance, I'm thinking about, can we use or apply some almost gaming applications or the educational applications to bring clients to a higher level in terms of risk awareness, in terms of what products look like, and can we then use that then in terms of how we deal with them going forward in the future. I think would be a big step forward. Also, the clients themselves can understand better and test better, and I think that would increase reliability and ultimately also strengthen trust in the industry. And then fourthly, I would say generally in the area of risk management and in the area of controls, the digitization will play a very significant role. A lot of what you have to do handily at the moment. I mean, you may have 1,000 credit risk management people. I think I'm relatively certain that over time you can do a lot of credit risk management with very sophisticated tools and applications with significantly less people, but certainly as good as you do it if you do it just manually, basically every day. All those things combined together. We have to try them out. Some of them will work. I'm sure that some of the applications or some of the ideas we have may not work, but then you have to change it. But you will have to increase and intensify the feedback loop much faster, and you will be able to do it in this environment as opposed to the past.
Interesting. It's really helpful. Should we go one more round? Or
sure.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question that's a little bit off the original conversation we've had, but I think really falls on what you're saying. One of the core lessons for people who study innovation is that typically incremental innovations happen within the familiarity of the industry, and that more transformational or discontinuous innovations come from unexpected locations. Given you have a number of years of experience, you've had, as Kathy said, you've worked in a number of kinds of locations. What are the industries that banking could learn from, given the last 20 years of transformations in many industries, right? So if we step away from financial services, and again, this is a classroom question, right? It's a hypothetical question. Where could banking learn from that isn't obvious to most of us today? If you can help us think about that for a minute.
Well, think about the way you treat your customers, or you deal with your customers, or trying to understand your customers. I think we certainly can learn a lot from what Silicon Valley has produced over the last couple of years. When you look at the transformation of Apple, for instance, over the many years, I think it's clearly that's something to be learned from that. I would say you would also see it in other industries that the ultimate focus on your clients and to find a way to make this easy. Fast. For instance, Uber for me is a very good example of somebody who has focused on something which was fairly narrow in a way, right? But optimized it in a way so that that you as a customer or feel you're being understood, you get the service you want, you have the quality you want, you want, and you get basically then ultimately that kind of trust. I mean, I use it from time to time because I think, well, I get a good driver, I get a good car, and I can even convenient. Every time I can basically give my rating on the service that I got. We have to get to I'm not suggesting every time you talk to your relationship manager you give them a rating, but you may do similar things or comparable things, and that's, I think, that focus on the ultimate needs and requirements of the clients. That's something which we can learn a lot from, I would say, the Silicon Valley companies.
That's interesting. That's great. You've been very kind. Let me open it up to other people too. But you've been really kind. I think Urs has been very kind to give us a glimpse of both his own vision and also a kind of a quick history of some of the ways that Credit Suisse and others are, what you're noticing in a sense, and where we go from there. I think, last comment he made about Uber, I think it's really important. One of the things we know, again, we study innovation, is that a lot of innovation is unloosening or loosening what are now conventions that make things seem necessary or inevitable, and unloosening those conventions and then reimagining what's possible. And all of us are customers of banking, whether at the check, as a retail customer or in private wealth or whatever area. So we all have firsthand experience of banking. I'm happy to entertain some questions, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
From people, either to what we said tonight, to what we haven't said yet, to what we might want to think about. And if you want to give him advice, we'll take advice as well, right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
So I'm going to cite China as an example, but I don't really want you to talk about China. I hope that you can apply this set of questions to perhaps another nation or area that you know better. So in China, we've seen 40% of the total banking market switch over to the non-bank banks in 8 years. And again, looking at China, you have different parts of the crowdfunding movement. You refer to crowdfunding that are growing 100 to 200% a year, and we're now measuring crowdfunding in the billions. So if those kinds of rates in China end up being what we see in crowdfunding across the world, there's some interesting questions there about disruption as well as in non-bank banking. So if you could just take the words non-bank banking and apply them to a different market and maybe talk about crowdfunding for a minute, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me just say something on the China development. And what it shows also is that sometimes, you're influenced by external boundaries in a way, right? The success of what you described in China, and I could cite another example, money market funds. The largest money market fund now is basically Alibaba's money market fund. That is basically the result of all the credit balances of their customers that they pool and then move it into money market fund. They pay higher interest rates than you would get in China from banks because they are, thank you very much, because they are, as you know, there's an upper limit for that. And that has created a huge money market fund. I mean, I think by now it's $90 billion, by far the largest I think you will find. You can see what, the potential. And that's an area that I hadn't addressed before. I mean, it's either the crowdfunding or the other ways of, let's say, pooling funds that you get through other activities. And that's an area where I would think the banks will come under attack. In a way, I mean, you know that bankers very often complain about regulations, and that some of the regulation is really difficult and complex and hard to do and so forth. But in a way, so far, regulation has also been a deterrent from extraneous entrance into the field, at least into the regulated space. Now, I'm relatively certain that those boundaries will become a bit more shaky over time, and as you have seen in the crowdfunding space so far, we have seen significant increases. Not just in China, we see it in other countries too. We see it in Western European countries. We see it in India. We have seen it in the microfinance space there. We see it in the U.S. Lending Club was a concept that was started like this. It's now a book of, I think, 30 billion. That's large. But still, given the overall size of the markets, I think it's probably too early to say that, you know, credit will now move completely into those areas. But I would say what Alibaba did to the money market fund conceptually could be done by other companies too outside of China and will happen. I'm relatively certain about that. The biggest impediment at the moment for that is regulation and cross-border constraints that you have to offer services across the globe. But in a truly, I would say, globalized world without any regulatory boundaries, that would happen, and would happen very fast, I think.
Sorry, I had one comment. But in China, you have like less financial product invested in. So why when Alibaba introduced this product, so much funding actually flow in. But in actually developed world, you have loads of actual financial products you can actually invest. So do you think that can be actually copied in the developed market?
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, you could argue that maybe you have too many different financial products. So, I mean, one of the opportunities will be, and technology may help you in that, is basically that you have a better selection process of what you really want. Now, China doesn't have that problem. It has other issues, and that's why it's so successful. I would say China, in a way, is a separate or a special case for that. But it's a good case to illustrate what one could do in sort of the non-banking financial services activities, and that's, I would say, I would be absolutely certain that this will happen in other countries too. And I don't think it will fundamentally change in China, even if China opens up more, and you would have a bigger collection of financial instruments too.
Other questions, please? Yeah, you know, I should have asked people to introduce themselves too. So, John, maybe just say quickly your name and who you are.
John Hoffmeyer. I teach here and I run the Impact Bond Fund.
Thanks very much. And also for you, please just, sorry, for Rick goes, just to have, sorry, just.
Oh, just a EMBA student here.
Okay. So go ahead, Rick, sorry.
I'm India School. You talked about retail banking. Investment banking has been sort of a small select club, if you like, for many years. Do you see any disruptive innovation in investment banking? And also, John in the room, I wanted to ask, is impact investing something that banks of your size will look seriously in the future?
Well, two completely
dramatically different questions.
Yeah. Now, if you talk about investment banking, you have to first define what you mean by that. Is it the advisory piece of investment banking? Is it the trading piece? Is it credit, leverage finance, and whatever? Some areas you will see disruption. I would say in the core advisory piece, it's probably a bit more difficult to assume, because that's clearly something which in the end you want to speak to your specialist bank, but maybe the way you do that may be completely differently than it was before. I do not envisage that you see investment bankers traveling the world with their briefcases necessarily. There may be smarter ways to have a constant dialogue with your clients, and by using technology and other applications. So that you will see. In other parts of it, in the credit space, I mean, they are as affected as anybody, as the commercial or the retail space, I would say. In trading, it's different. In trading, I mean, we probably move more towards a world where you will have 24-hour trading opportunities across the globe. And there, I think banks will have their piece, but a lot of the activities there, pure execution, will not be the high value creation activities of banks going forward, I would say. And then the other piece was the impact investing. Yes, impact investing has become more and more interesting and important also for banks, be it in sustainability funds, or otherwise. What we see as a trend is that more and more clients actually want their monies, or part of their monies, invested in a meaningful way for causes that they like, and therefore impact investing will become more and more important, and you will see more and more these kind of funds. That's, I mean, relatively certain. You see it in. We had funds for women causes, for instance. We had funds, microfinance funds, and other kinds of sustainability-related funds, and they grow, I would say, over proportionally at the moment. Yes. I mean, they're always, in the end, you'll have to be able to demonstrate that so the expected returns actually are met. But I must say the track record of many of those is actually very good. It's very good so far.
Yeah, please go ahead and just introduce yourself, if you will.
Yeah. So I'm Linus Bühler, executive MBA student, and suggestions are allowed, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So Hamdi, I think it's great that you have an autonomous car inventor on your board, etc. But if you're interested in knowing what the customer of tomorrow is interested in, you should offer a seat to a young MBA student. is that an application or? I'm too old. But someone, I mean, why not take some young, smart people that's not the customer of today, but the customer of tomorrow?
Well, you may not believe it, but we have a lot of young, smart people in our company, and actually we hire a couple of hundred every year out of graduate schools and out of undergraduate schools.
I think a lot of big institutions don't do that. And it's great if you do that, because that's...
Now, interestingly enough, and I'm not divulging any too many secrets, but when we did the Future Lab project, when we actually looked at it, we intentionally selected a group of young people from our organization across the globe, from Switzerland, from Asia, from the United States, but not the senior people. They came in later than to assess some of the ideas, but I mean to produce the ideas and the thinking, we intentionally didn't do that with so I'd say more senior, older people with grey hair like me.
But now that I think about it, it is an application.
Okay.
Go ahead.
For what?
No. What were you going to say?
Yeah, that's a bit the tougher question. The thing with board seats is it's more than defining the customer of the future. You have to do a lot of supervisory and control work that maybe you enjoy a bit less than coming up with new ideas. But I will keep it in mind. If I have a shortage, I'll get back.
I have a question. I'm a Wellington Holbrook. I'm an analyst student here as well. Curious to, so you described the ecosystem of a lot of young fintech incubators and small businesses coming up, and that potential risk. What about the risk of the financially well-heeled organizations like Apple and Google and so on, who are potentially considering more and more moves into the financial space?
Interesting. I mean, that's a very good question, actually. The even better question is, why haven't they done it yet? Because it can't be a question of money, right? It can't be a question of technological know-how. Google or Apple, for that matter, could do that relatively easily. And some of them have actually a banking license. I think Facebook has a banking license. Apple may have one too. But they have never gone into the core of the regulated banking activities. And I think there is a reason for that. I don't think that those companies necessarily want to go into the regulated sphere. I think that what they strategically do, I don't know it, but what I assume they do is they look at the value chain of the services that the banking industry provides. And they will see what can we do successfully, maybe better, with good margins, without having to undergo the whole scrutiny of the let's say the regulated world of banking. And that's what I think you will see more and more also going forward. But there's no question that any of those companies, they could open a bank and they could say, well, let's look as to how the banking of the future would look like. Now it behooves us as incumbents to make sure that we are as far advanced with our own offerings that's actually not so easy to do it. But quite frankly, I think the main reason is that I think they haven't done it because it's still a bit further away from the original activities. The other reason is, if you take a company like Google, for instance, they know a lot about their clients, which they know from their normal current business model. And there is an issue of, I would say, trust, maybe even almost like conflict of interest if you apply that knowledge that you have from other activities into the provision of banking services, into risk management structures and so forth. I think that's the other reason why they may be a bit hesitant to actually go in full speed. But there's no question they could. I mean, they have the ingredients, technical know-how, and the money to do it.
Hi, my name is Jessica. I'm an MBA student here, and I was wondering, with the increase in activity with mobile banking, a lot of banks in the U.S. at least are having issues engaging their customer on the front end and creating that loyalty. So you sort of mentioned creating an electronic community and a feedback loop, but how would you envision sort of increasing that relationship when you no longer have as many face-to-face interactions to cross-sell products or to build that loyalty up front?
I mean, it's basically one of the most fundamental, most difficult questions to answer. We try to do it now as part of the way we create our digital private bank. In fairness, it's not easy to do it. It's not easy to do it. I would say it's the ultimate litmus test. If you don't get that done, then the risk of not keeping clients or having bigger turnovers or losing clients or having a client just for one thing and then losing him again will significantly increase. There's no one way to do it. I think it's a combination of various factors that you have to be able to provide an offering that he finds attractive. But it's very important that at all times a client has the possibility of a direct interaction with somebody at the bank. I think that's vitally important. I would want it at least as a client, and I'm pretty certain most clients would want to have it too. That is what you can do, and what you can consider is that you even create special environments or special social media groups among clients or with particular people with particular interest in certain fields that you could do in a sort of semi-controlled way within your environment. That's something which I think is could be quite an interesting approach. So I'm not calling it the Facebook for the banking clients or so, but something akin to that. Some of the elements that you use there could be something which might be you might be able to strengthen relationship with clients going forward. You have to do that. If you lose your client and the direct relationship to your client, it will have a negative impact on your business, and that can be quite severe. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan. I'm SME China-India Relations here at Oxford. I'm curious. You're on the board of the advisory board on financial institutions in Moscow and Beijing as well. And I'm curious what you think of something like the Chinese sort of, expected to be Chinese-led BRICS Bank, things like that. I mean, this isn't quite financial innovation, or perhaps it could be. Like, what sort of effect do you think a BRICS Bank or anything like that would have on, global financial markets or the international monetary system?
Well, some of them play a fairly big role already, and may play an even bigger. As I said, some of the banks that are very large. I mean, Chinese banks. If you look at the top 10 banks in the world, I don't know, 6 of them are Chinese banks probably. When you just look at the balance sheet size, if those banks would actually go global, if they really wanted to and would try to sort of do that, they will play a very significant role in those countries, and that's basically possible for many of the banks. In Russia, obviously, at the moment is a bit in a different situation for obvious reasons. But you have banks that have grown out of those countries that have become very large. I mean, take Brazil as an example. There are some Brazilian banks that have become extremely big and are basically successful way above their home territory. That's so. I would say in a global financial services world, that's doable. The problem is, again, I would say that sometimes it's not so easy to get past those regulatory hurdles that you still have for certain markets, be it the EU, be it in the US, and so forth. So you have to have the proper licenses. The regulatory environment has to be such that you can actually do your business, and that is something which puts up an obstacle that you have to overcome. And that's sometimes harder for banks that come from countries where there is not a long tradition of reciprocity and acknowledgement of regulatory environments and the like. But that's a trend you will see. I mean, you look at the development of Chinese banks over the last 10 years.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
I'm an undergrad studying economics and management now. In light of the HSB fiasco, do banks need to change? If so, what do they need to change, or is everything fine?
Well,
everything's fine. Next question.
Questions for whom? Is it time? Now, obviously, you would not expect me to comment on the HSBC matter. The only thing I would say, the way I read it in the newspapers, most of the allegations stem from a time before 2008. Now, did banks have to change since then? Yes, they did have. Did they change? I think many of the banks, most of the banks have significantly changed in many respects. Be it in terms of business model, be it in terms of controls, be it in terms of compliance standards. But the world has also changed too, right? I mean, a lot of standards that society today expects from banks are different than they probably have been 20 years ago or 10 years ago. There's a tough, I would say, adjustment process for that. In the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, banks had to do a lot of changes to fix capital shortcomings, other things. We have seen wrong incentive steerings. We have seen compensation systems that went berserk, that you had to change, to adjust, to actually align employees at the bank with clients. And a lot has happened. The trouble is, this is a fairly long period of transition that you have to do. And any time or every time something comes up, and even if it's from the past, the public at large, and rightfully so, I would say, says, well, doesn't it ever change? I mean, the biggest, if I had one wish for our sector, is get it done and make sure that, you know, from now on things are running smoothly, and hope that you don't get caught with something legacy item from the past. It's a very hard transition, but the only thing I would say for the industry is that the industry has changed more than people at large or generally believe they have. The changes that have gone through that industry are fundamental, I would say, in almost every respect. Now, does that mean that nothing can go wrong? No. In an industry with millions of people who work there, you will always have something that can go wrong. But the most basic and most fundamental mistakes or shortcomings of the industry have been addressed, be it through regulators, be it through banks themselves. And I can tell you, if there's one thing that, as a chairman of the bank, look extremely carefully, is that, you know, we do not run into these kind of issues. Why? Because apart from all the other things, because it's wrong, it's not right to do it, the reputational damage that you create to an institution, and therefore also the economic damage that results from that, is enormous. And as I said before, I've talked about trust. I mean, the best way to undermine trust is exactly if things like these happens. That's not what you want. That's not what you want. But that's it is a transition phase, and there may be things coming up or have been coming up that have to be resolved. A lot of it has gone through the system. Banks have also paid a lot for that, be it in the US, be it in other countries. But I think, you know, probably the honest truth is there may always be some things that could come up somewhere that will have a negative impact. And once an industry is so much on the radar screen as banks are, it doesn't need a lot, you know, to reinforce your bias that, you know, things do not change. And that's the biggest problem. You have to get out of the headlines if you could do that. And the only thing to do it is that quarter by quarter and year after year, you basically demonstrate that you run a proper business, you run it properly, that, you know, you have the right business ethics and the right culture in the firm. If you do that over time, things will change, but it will not be overnight. It will be over time.
We have just time for a few more questions, so let me do this if I may. I'm going to ask people just to pose their questions, 3 or 4, and then you have a chance to react to the ensemble. So Chajin, you have a question still? And you have a question? And Andre? And you have a question? Okay, so we're going to do 4 for now and see where we get. So quick questions, he'll make quick answers. I'd like to just do them in a row, and he's going to collect whatever he wants to answer and answer it.
Okay, I'm Chajin, I'm an MBA student. My background is in technology. I was wondering, in banks, do you have actually a division that focuses on innovation?
Okay, so that's good. So do you have a focus on innovation?
Yeah, I was wondering if banks actually focus on innovation, if there's a division that actually focuses on innovation.
There's not a division. I can answer that right away.
Yeah, sure.
No, there's not a division on innovation, but what we have a special, I would say, a special unit outside that deals with that aspect that I discussed about the digital private bank, which is basically innovation tool. And we have within our strategy department, we have a subgroup that deals with innovation trends, and we have an innovation board also at the company. But it's fair to say that is of recent that we have that. Typically, we did not have an innovation division as such that was run as a division.
Go ahead.
My name is Dr Rohner. I'm a student in the Unloosening program here. Your private banking operates in a premium segment, and a couple of these pillars that you have are usually personal contact, and another one in the past at least was exclusive access to certain investments. And now the question is, with the commoditization of investment on the one hand side, and maybe the personal contact being less important in the future, how do you set yourself apart from the retail sector? How do you create a premium there?
What you will find is that the more sophisticated clients are, the more sophisticated financial issues or problems they have. And for that, you will always need to do more than commoditized products. But there is a segment where I think commoditization of products will play a role. And then I think I would say the added value of a bank in that segment is that you are good at picking the right products or the right strategy for a client tailored to what he really needs. That will be, even in a commoditized world, this will be essential. Basically, it's the asset allocation and then the precise proposal of what you want to do. And that's still something which, even in a fully digitized world, will be important. I think will probably even be more important.
But I'm sorry, just to follow up, but it's offered by retail banks nowadays, right? And I just push a button and all of a sudden I have a Skype conference with my consultant. So in a way,
the question, look, ultimately it's a question of the quality of the advice you're getting and of the I would say the particulars of the service. And I'm absolutely certain that by the push of the button, I can give you a model portfolio that you can take out of the internet in 10 seconds. And you may do it and you may be very happy about it, but maybe it's not what you really want or what you really need. You want to discuss something with somebody who understands what you need, so who knows you. Who knows what, he wants to buy a house. He has 2 kids, don't have to go through private schools, so maybe that's my investment horizon is like this, and that will drive maybe some of the decisions in a slightly different fashion than just pull up a model portfolio.
Andre, last question. All the way back, so I'm sorry, go ahead to you, yeah. Yes. No, picture, yeah.
Me, okay. Just to follow on the HSBC comment, I was going to ask about the anti-banking lobby that seems to be prevalent at the minute for the last 6 or 7 years. And would you say that as a board, you are now more internally focused and not so much looking out of the window?
What do you mean by looking out of the window?
At the customer, as you were talking about earlier, at what future customers would expect banking to look like.
I think one of the big problems that the banking industry has had in the last couple of years is indeed that they had to focus so much and do so much introspective work in order to change processes, procedures, build out compliance departments, and so forth, that I would say they probably did not spend enough time on focusing on developing clients' needs. And maybe even their growth strategies. That's what you see in many respects. Yes, that's true.
But do you see it changing at all?
Yes.
Is the apology honeymoon coming to an end, do you think, or do you see?
It's not an apology honeymoon. I wouldn't call it a honeymoon in the first place. Actually, my understanding of a honeymoon is something different. But I mean, we may have different standards. I hope we'll be in a situation where we do not have to apologize so much for things that went wrong in the past and can focus on new things. I mean, I said it in town halls at my company, said, look, we now have to shift gears and we have to move forward to actually grow our company and come up with a strategy as to how we want to develop the great businesses that we have. And that is something which clearly, when you have to constantly fight to reduce costs, to make your business more efficient in times where margins come down, where interest rates come down, that's a hard thing to do, and it's a mind change, actually. And you can only do it probably successfully if you can put the other things, to an end and say, well, we have dealt with the legacy issues, we know what went wrong, we have fixed it, and now we can move on. You're absolutely right in your analysis.
That's great. So I need to bring this to a close a little bit, I'm sorry, but let me give you a different ending challenge. I'm going to ask Urs to give us 2 minutes of his reflections on the conversation, and also in a sense to pose what he thinks the questions are you should have asked him. right? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to both, you've been very kind and responsive. So a couple minutes to close any thoughts you'd like to share, and maybe also push back on a couple of questions that you think would be interesting. So we've heard a lot of different ideas here. We started out with a lot of talk on customers, and we've moved to some other parts of the value system. We had some provocative questions. We had some questions that were really opening up the different fates and futures of banking, and then we talked the last few questions really about the quality, again, the issues of trust and reputation and probity that were at the heart of Urs's comments earlier, and so how that's really going to be a distinguishing part of the thing. So again, a couple minutes to share parting thoughts, but also challenge us a little bit.
Well, I wouldn't push back too much on questions. I thought the questions were very good and very justified. I even got an application I didn't expect, but that's all fine. No, I think that, I mean, I think you asked the right questions. And it was clear to me that if, as a banker, you go to London or near London to Oxford these days, you would get the question of the HSBC. That was clear. That's what I expected. But for me, it was a very good question to actually deal with the question of corporate culture and how you can actually move that and change that over time, and why it's necessary to do it, because otherwise you may actually undermine the credibility ultimately of an institution, and therefore also its economical success. There's not much I would want to say on top of what I have been saying. I think you were very nice and kind. Actually, normally I get much nastier questions, so thank you very much for that. I think the question I expected from you that you didn't ask me, if I may say that, and was, why are you still in that industry with a lot of all these issues and problems from the past? I think because I think it's a fascinating industry. And it's an industry which is, in my opinion, is at an inflection point where you can do a lot to move ahead. Actually, there are a lot of opportunities to grow in that industry, even in difficult economic circumstances. But, and that's what I think is the real sort of challenge that motivates you to run the bank. I think the financial service industry, and I have to make some propaganda, is an intellectually stimulating industry and has been for a long time. A lot has changed. Even compensation has changed and systems have changed. But if you want to do that, I think you can do a lot of good also to society in that industry. Extension of credit is an important and noble task that you have to do to society. If you don't believe me, just look as to what is going on in the Eurozone at the moment. We desperately need that. We need it to stimulate growth. And if you stimulate growth, you can do away with a lot of things that are at the moment not running so smoothly, high unemployment rates and other things. So I think banks can play a good role, but they have to fix the house first. But if they do that, then I think this will be a fascinating industry. And if you get it right on the disruption side, on the technology side, then I'm relatively certain that it will also be hugely economically successful going forward.
Great. Great. I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight and really good questions. And please join me in thanking Urs Rohner for an extremely candid.